Okay, we're diving into a story about a murder that absolutely haunted Japan for 26 long years. For decades, the killer was a complete ghost, a phantom who just seemed to vanish after an incredibly brutal crime. But the real key to their identity? Well, it wasn't hiding in some high-tech lab. It was hiding in plain sight, inside a high school yearbook.
Just listen to these words. These are the actual words of the killer, spoken 26 years after the fact. This confession didn't just solve a murder. It completely unraveled this twisted story of obsession, of envy, and a secret that just festered for nearly 3 decades.
What's so jarring about this case, really, is the contrast. It's like looking at two different worlds. On one side, you have this picture of a happy, normal family. And on the other, a killer driven by a rejection that happened more than 30 years before she ever took a life. Her name was Yasufuku Kumiko, and her story is a pretty chilling reminder of just how long resentment can burn.
And then, bang, October 2025. The impossible happens. After 26 years of total silence, the case breaks wide open. And when the killer's identity was finally revealed, it sent an absolute shockwave through Japan.
Think about that. The composite sketch, the thousands of police interviews, they all missed her. The killer wasn't some mysterious phantom. She was an ordinary woman, living a totally ordinary life, probably just a few miles away. I mean, this case was the very definition of cold. For 26 years, every single lead just went nowhere. But even in the coldest cases, sometimes there's a spark. And in this story, there were two things that kept that hope for justice alive. A detective who dared to look at everything with fresh eyes, and a husband who made an unbelievable vow that would end up costing him millions. So, to really get how this was all finally solved, we have to rewind. We have to go all the way back to where it began, back to what seemed like a normal day in 1999, and a crime that was anything but. The attack on Namiko Takaba was, well, it was vicious, and it was brutally personal. She was stabbed multiple times right there in her own home. It was a violent end to a young life that left a family completely shattered and a whole community living in fear. And this is what makes it so terrifying. It happened in the middle of the day, nothing was stolen, and the only witness was a 2-year-old boy, left alone with his mother's body for hours.
So, in the face of this unimaginable tragedy, the victim's husband, Takaba Satoru, does something incredible. He makes a vow, a promise that would define the next quarter-century of his life and, believe it or not, ultimately help solve the case.
Satoru Takababa absolutely refused to let his wife's murder become just another cold case file collecting dust. He fought to change Japan's entire statute of limitations for murder, making sure that killers could never just wait out the clock. But his most extraordinary act was a deeply personal one.
Get this. For 26 years, Satoru paid over 22 million yen, that's roughly 150,000 US dollars, to keep the apartment exactly as it was on the day his wife died. He perfectly preserved the crime scene, holding on to this hope that one day it would be needed to bring her killer to justice.
Can you even imagine that? Every single month, for 26 years, Satoru would go back to that apartment, pay the bills, and maintain these dehumidifiers, all to keep this incredibly painful memory frozen in time. He was betting everything on the hope that this perfectly preserved crime scene would one day be the key. For years, the police were completely stumped. They had all these clues, but it was like they were pieces from 5 different puzzles. Nothing fit together. So how did they finally crack a case that had been unsolvable for over 2 decades? You see, the police had a composite sketch, they had a blood type, and they even had a shoe print. The victim's 2-year-old son had this one memory, a convenience store auntie. The killer even left behind a drink bottle, a clue she thought would lead police right to her. And yet, for decades, all of it led absolutely nowhere. So what finally solved this mystery? Was it some futuristic tech? A deathbed confession? Nope. It was a new detective who just decided to ignore the 26 years of dead ends and simply start over from page 1. This new detective went right back to basics. He started re-investigating the husband's high school classmates, and that's when he found her name, Yasufuku Kumiko. When the police asked for a DNA sample, she refused. That was the first red flag in 26 years. And when her DNA was finally tested, it was a perfect match. The wall of silence that stood for nearly 3 decades came crumbling down. So now they have her. But the biggest question of all still remained. Why? The motive wasn't robbery. It wasn't a sudden argument. It was a dark, twisted envy that had been festering for more than 30 years.
See, Yasufuko had a crush on Satoru back in high school. He rejected her. Years later, at a class reunion, she saw him again. But their lives had gone down completely different paths. While he was happily talking about his wife and his young son, she was still grieving the loss of her own daughter to leukemia and feeling like a complete failure. His happiness basically became a mirror for her own misery.
In her warped view of the world, his perfect life was an insult to her own suffering. She couldn't kill her own pain, so she decided to inflict it on him by destroying the one thing that was the source of all his joy, his wife, Namiko.
And through all of this, Kohei, the little boy who witnessed that horror, grew up watching his father's relentless quest for justice. He didn't just lose a mother that day. He gained this unforgettable lesson what it means to truly fight for a memory. So, you really have to ask yourself, what is the true price of justice? For the Takaba family, it was 26 years of waiting, millions of yen, and a life lived in the shadow of this unresolved trauma. It's just a staggering price to pay for an answer that was, all along, hiding just one high school yearbook away.